In the Fellowship of the Ring, we are introduced to the Shire theme. At the very end of the trilogy, we hear the same melody again, when the characters return back home. The first time it's bright and joyful, the last time it's slower and bittersweet. This is just one of the ways that movie music talks to us. In this video, we're gonna uncover some of the hidden language behind our favorite soundtracks. And before we're done, we'll return to the Shire theme, because it quietly demonstrates many of the ideas we'll explore today. One of the most simple goals of music is to convey an emotion. This can be done with harmony, rhythm, tempo, and many other musical tools. Movies utilize this to kind of manipulate the viewer into feeling a certain way. Let's for example look at one of the most iconic themes in cinema. Just these two simple notes already convey so much. It's dread, it's mystery, it's panic. The music tells us how we should feel about the shark even before we see it. In Up, the piece that accompanies the opening montage reinforces the emotions present in the scene. It starts joyfully, but gradually descends into a sombre reflection of its past happiness. This can be effectively demonstrated. Just pick your favorite movie scene and play a different music over it. For example, Celine Dion's music gives the I'm flying scene a sense of ravishingness, implying trust and love between the two characters. But if the soundtrack was more melancholic, for example, now the scene gets an entirely different meaning. Now it's more like two past lovers, each recalling on their happier past selves. Music can be used to foreshadow future events. In many cases, it contradicts what's happening on screen. A happy scene, for example, can be underscored with ominous theme. For example, in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, in their early scenes with Professor Quirrell, we hear the leitmotif that we will later learn belongs to Voldemort, quietly hinting at the reveal at the end of the movie. When we return to Shire, we get another example of this, where the dark, sinister One Ring theme plays over a seemingly innocent and lighthearted scene.
He's up to something.
This shows that corruption exists even in the most innocent places. An established leitmotif can also be used to foretold the future. In Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, we're introduced to the film's antagonist, the wolf, as well as his iconic whistle theme. Later in the movie, the leitmotif is used to show Wolf's presence, even before we actually see him on screen. We have mentioned leitmotifs a couple of times already, so let's talk about them more deeply. Leitmotif is a small musical figure that is assigned to a character, a place, or an idea in the story. Star Wars Episode 4 is full of famous leitmotifs. Important feature of a leitmotif is that it is repeated a couple of times throughout the story. The repetitions can be varied, depending on the emotional core of the scene or the emotional state of the character. And they also undergo a certain transformation throughout the story. They evolve with the character, with the idea or the place they represent. This is what I was talking about in the opening with the Shire theme. At the start of the trilogy, it is innocent and lighthearted, really easygoing. By the end, it becomes more mature. In Requiem for a Dream, the leitmotif represents the idea of losing yourself, your desires, your close ones, your dreams. At the beginning, it functions more like a warning for the characters, but by the end, it becomes the inevitable reality. Even though we enjoy what music brings to a scene, sometimes silence can be just as powerful. I said that music can manipulate you into feeling a certain way. A lack of music forces this decisiveness onto a viewer and the visuals alone. Absence of music is largely used in horror movies, in order to create tension before a jump scare, for example. Apart from the dread, it also provides a sense of realism, like in No Country for Old Men.
I didn't mean nothing by it.
Didn't mean nothing.
This movie contains no soundtrack, just constant gusts of wind. It makes the themes this film explores that much raw and real, and the antagonist that much scarier. Quiet Place is much more immersive with the lack of any music. You feel like you are inside the world with the characters, which makes it a pretty effective horror experience. Where a simple thing such as a lantern being knocked over immediately evokes terror in the characters and the viewers alike. Throughout the history, we began to associate the different musical elements with things in our world. For example, brass instruments were historically used in battles, to raise morale on your side and to diminish it on the opposing one. That's why battle scenes in movies are usually scored with brass instruments in the forefront. High strings are now associated with tension, low brass with danger. Choir is linked with spiritualism and sacredness. But music can also refer to cultures. Pentatonic scale, for example, is largely used in Asian countries' music. That's why you'll hear it used in the soundtrack when a scene takes place in these countries. When a movie is set in medieval times, the score usually utilizes instruments that actually existed in that era of time. Game of Thrones soundtrack, for example, uses strings, flutes, harps. All of these instruments actually existed in the equivalent of our time of history. Hans Zimmer, for example, cleverly opted to use a non-Western style of music for the soundtrack of Dune. The unfamiliarity in the music resulted in the movie having this alien-like feel to it, which was the point since the movie is set in fantasy. Music can also help with the pacing of a scene. Tracks with high BPM or fast rhythm can create momentum. Fight scenes, action scenes, montages, they all utilize this technique. For example, the iconic montage in Rocky. Fast-paced music is usually accompanied with quicker cuts, whereas more drawn-out track is supplemented with longer, uncut scenes. This can enhance the chaos of an action scene, or bring out the peace in a quieter one. Sometimes a filmmaker can go as far as to have the scenes actually bend to the music. The opening sequence in Baby Driver is a perfect example of this. Everything in that scene obeys to the beat. Door slams, traffic lights, sirens, gunshots, and of course the editing cuts. This whole choreography of the visuals feel really nice. It is smooth, and our brains love that constant rhythm. In Whiplash, the editing is literally tied to the tempo.
Dragging just a hair.
Cuts emphasize rhythm and the mistakes Newman makes. The music and the editing becomes inseparable. Music can sometimes reveal something that is hiding beneath the surface level of the scene. A seemingly lighthearted scene that is scored with some dark tune can signal something sinister behind the scenes. Furthermore, music can tell us many things about the characters. Characteristics we would otherwise have to learn through their actions or through exposition. The opening scene of Inglourious Basterds shows Hans Landa, the movie's villain, driving in a car in the distance. The score opens with a motif from Beethoven's Fur Elise. From that, we can immediately assume one thing. The people that are approaching are probably German. And we know that we are in the middle of the Second World War, in the year 1941. And when we connect the dots, we can immediately tell that the soldiers mean no good, even before we actually see them. And sometimes the choice of music can be ironic. The main theme of Godfather is really tender and gentle, and it usually plays over scenes of violence, unfaithfulness, and organized crime. Many film genres have their specific type of music. Westerns are usually scored with guitars and whistles. The roots of these genre-specific ideas are hard to trace and probably deserve a video on its own. But the constant use of these specific musical elements for each genre resulted in its connection. Romantic movies are usually accompanied with lush strings and simple harmonies. Sci-fi movies usually use these otherworldly sounding synthesizers to evoke the unrealistic, alien characteristics of the genre. Jordan Peele's Get Out is an interesting example of this. It uses typical horror tropes in music, but it combines them with African vocal traditions. This, of course, plays into the themes of the movie, but simultaneously it uses this deeply rooted genre language and the cultural code at the same time to reinvent the music. Another excellent horror, Hereditary, goes against those typical musical tropes. Instead of sudden stingers, crescendos before jump scares and musical warnings, Ari Aster, the director of the movie, goes for these droning textures that keep the tension that much longer. This results in a very atmospheric watch, which is typical for all of Ari Aster's movies. So you see, there are many ways in which movie music can be used. From setting an emotional core of the scene to foreshadowing future events. We have learned that leitmotifs are great tools for developing ideas or characters. Sometimes the best choice of music is none at all, since silence can be loud as well. Different cultures are having different properties in music, which can be used to narrate the story. And furthermore, the music itself can be used as a narrator, or even an editor. And different genres have their own musical specifics. If you can think of any, write it down in the comments, I'm curious. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown. If you did, leave a like, subscribe and share it with your friends. Alright, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.